Hi, my name is Carmine Starnino, and I'm the Associate Publisher of Véhicule Press. I want to welcome you to this afternoon launch for Words Are the Worst by Dutch poet Erik Lindner, translated into English by Francis Jones. The book is part of the Signal Editions poetry series, an imprint that I edit for the press. I'm coming to you live from Montreal, but one of the things I love about these virtual launches is that we can beam in guests from almost anywhere. This allows us to celebrate the community around the poet, the friendships that have provided support and counsel. So in that sense, we're joined by Ottawa-based David O'Meara, a very fine poet and friend who is very familiar with Erik's work, indeed contributed a thoughtful introduction to the collection, and who will help us explore some of the elements that make Erik's poetry so outstanding. As befits a press that works out of Montreal, translation is a very big part of our mandate. Every year we bring, or try to, the best of French language poetry and prose to English readers. I would love to do more, especially for poetry. I've always admired UK presses like Blood Axe and Carcanet and the international poets that are part of their translation list. And I'm happy that many of our poets are active translators from other languages, Portuguese, German, Spanish, but the incentives in terms of grants don't make it possible for us to entertain more ambitious ideas of expanding beyond canned lit. So when David O'Meara approached me with the proposal of publishing Erik's selected poems 2 years ago, the idea was to gather the work from his six previous books. And then we learned that the Dutch Foundation for Literature could help. It was an offer I couldn't refuse. So I'm grateful for David for thinking of us, and for Erik and Francis for being patient through this whole process. Grateful to the Dutch Foundation for helping subsidize part of the publication, and especially Victor Schefferly for helping with the application. And thanks to Catherine Lantier for providing her very generous endorsement of the poems, which we put on the back. In the back. So I am going to invite Erik and Francis, who will do a bilingual reading from the book, Dutch, then in English. And then I'm going to call on David O'Meara, who will to talk to them a bit afterward about their process in working together. And after that, we'll move to a question and answer period and cap it all off with a final reading. I encourage all of you to post your questions wherever you may be watching this, on Facebook or YouTube. We will keep tabs on those questions, selecting the best, and one of them will win a free copy of the book. But you don't have to pin your hopes on a free copy. You can buy the book in any number of places: Indigo, Amazon, your local bookseller, or directly from us. We ship books out the same day. There should be a link soon in the comment box below you that will bring you to our website. All right, let's get started. Erik Lindner is a Dutch poet, writer, and literary critic. His first book of poetry appeared in 1996, and 5 more collections have followed, including 2 novels. His work has been translated into French, German, and Italian. Words Are the Worst Selected Poems is his first volume of poetry in English. Francis Jones translates poetry from Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, Hungarian, Russian, and Dutch. His translations have received many important UK and international awards, and he is the only translator to have won UK's European Poetry Translation Prize twice. Professor of Translation Studies at Newcastle University, he lives in rural Northumberland. So we'll invite them to come up now.
Hi, welcome. We are going to read together. Welcome to this ceremony. Thank you, Carmine, for the introduction and for organizing this event. We are going to read 7 poems, or fragments of longer series of poems, and I've let more or less Francis, my dear translator, decide which poems we will read. Most of them. So I'll start. I start with something that I usually never read.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Good poem.
I'll be reading in Dutch and you in English. We could change it, but we do that. Getuigen op de drempel. Klap van de molen. Vogels in de wieken. Geblaf bij de woonboten. Kettingen slepen door het grind. Een regelmatige ratslag hoog in de lucht. Regenwater staat op het dak van de vrachtwagen. Het licht van de zwaaiende lampion over het billenbord. De overhellende balustrade aan de rand van het plateau. Een rivier die uitmondt in een drassig veld.
We're reading two parts from this poem. The first is a very typical Dutch landscape, I guess. The other part we're reading, well, there's a Jan van Eyck picture, the Arnolfini wedding, which is related to. Witnesses at the threshold. 1. Birds tilt at windmills, all in a whirl. Barking by the houseboats, chains drag through the gravel. Cartwheeling like clockwork high in the sky. Rainwater in a pool on the roof of a truck. The light of the swaying lantern over the row of doorbells. The gallery round the tower, its guardrail slanting outward. A river flowing into a marshy field.
4. Getuigen op de drempel. We zijn de kaars die brandt bij klaarlichte dag. De sinaasappel onder de bolling in het raam. De tovenaarsleerling houdt voor zijn bruid zijn hand op. De stille cape, kroonluchters, de groene sleep aan de mouwranden. Trouw als de hond die op hem past, de kwast aan de rugleuning, de bezem tegen de stoel. Getuigen zijn we op de drempel, niemand die hen hoort en toch komt het altijd ergens aan.
4. Witnesses at the threshold. We are the candle burning in broad daylight, the orange lying under the bulge in the window. The sorcerer's apprentice holds out a hand for his bride. The motionless cape, chandelier, the green dagging on her sleeves. Faithful as the dog guarding them, the brush on the chairback, the broom against the seat. We are witnesses at the threshold. No one can hear them, yet somehow it still gets through.
It's true, it's quite a Dutch landscape. There's this river ending in nothing in the neighborhood, in the vicinity of Maastricht. And this next poem, Wake, we'll just do one part of it. It's a cycle of 11 poems. We only read one. I wrote it at Ostende in Belgium, Ostend. And I wanted to make a sort of poem in distichons, in strophes of 2 lines. And one line would be a wave coming to you, and the next line would be a wave going back. And like that, I hoped I will get a sort of sea rhythm in the poetry without that. If I don't mention the sea anymore, you still hear the sea rhythm. But still, 11 poems long, I kept on mentioning the sea, so it didn't really escape the words. Zo. Brandend de randen van de wolken, zeilend, meeuwen als de wind aan zwelt. Surfers op een buik als drenkelingen. Hoe golven langs de strekdam trekken, hoe hun koppen vooruitsteken. Hoe schuim op het zand wappert in de wind en loskomt en verder rolt. Hoe het schuim dat aanspoelt, het terugglijdend schuim verder duwt. Hoe een golf omslaat en pas daarna schuim maakt. Hoe het witte schuim van een nieuwe golf als een tong door bruin gedroogd schuim glijdt. Hoe het sop kolkt en tegen de pier aanslaat. Schuimkoppen die boven de strekdam komen. Regen die opspringt uit zee.
This is from Wake. Burning borders of the clouds, sailing, seagulls as the wind rises, surfers on their bellies like the drowned. How waves slide along the breakwater, how their peaks jut forward, how foam on the sand flutters in the wind and breaks free and rolls further. How the foam washing ashore pushes the backsliding foam further on. How a wave breaks and only then makes foam. How the wet foam of a new wave slides like a tongue through brown dried foam. How the seawater swirls and slaps against the pier. Wave crests overtopping the breakwater. Rain leaping out of the sea.
This next poem is called Acedia. I use the term acedia in some books, and one book of poems is even called like that, acedia. It's also the title of the German book, Nach Arcadia, the German translation. It's the only difficult word I think I use in my poetry. So I think this was the last time I ever used the word acedia for a poem. In de afgestompte ochtend is de vlakte niet leeg. Geen boom staat in bloei, geen veld is beplant. Nergens is de aarde geribbeld of geel. In het haveloos halfdonker is de greppel niet droog. Op de barre bodem drijft de schim van een man, zijn hand onder wortels verstrikt in het zand. Schril brandt door de nevel de morgenster en steekt met zijn punt langs de heuvel en rijdt het land tot op de einder open.
Acedia. In the ground down morning, the plains not empty. No tree is in blossom, no field is sown. The earth is nowhere ridged or yellow. In the tattered half dark, the ditch is not dry. On its barren streambed floats the ghost of a man, his hand under roots tangled in sand. The morning star burns sharp through the mist and stabs its barbs along the hill and rips the land open as far as the horizon.
The next poem is a dedication to a Dutch documentary maker, Joris Evans. Well, he was Dutch, but most of his films he made when he was older outside of Holland and outside of Dutch production funding, I think, or production gear. This film, the last film that I wrote this poem to, was when he filmed in China, and he had one more desire. It was the first time the filmmaker was in his own film, and his desire was he wanted to film the wind. But how can you film the wind? So they carried him on a chair up a mountain in China, a sand desert mountain, and they planted the chair in the sand, and he sat there to wait on the wind, and which is sort of the scene that I wrote the poem from. The film is called I'm forgetting the title.
Histoire du vent.
Histoire du vent. Merci. Thank you. The History of the Wind. That's this, and in fact, it's his wife Marcella Evans who films him, and it's a great film. Tot een wiek van de molen losdraait, Evans wacht op een stoel op de wind. Tot de punt van een duinpan verkruimelt, op de wind op een stoel wacht Evans. Tot de trein in een rookpluim oplost, Evans op een stoel wacht op de wind. Tot het stof zijn ogen doet tranen, wacht op een stoel op de wind Evans. Tot het zweet op zijn kin opdroogt, op een stoel wacht Evans op de wind. Tot de baarden van kamelen wapperen, tot korrels als vlooien op de vlucht slaan, tot een slinger in een vliegertouw vastraakt, tot zijn wandelstok als golfclub omverslaat. tot het zand borrelt als schuim in de branding, tot het deksel van zijn koffer opengaat. Op een stoel op de bergtop wijst Evans. Daar slaapt de wind, in een hol in de woestijn.
It's a marvelous magical film if you ever get to see it. Histoire du vent. Anyway. Evans and the wind. Till the windmill sails spin free, Evans waits on a chair for the wind. Till the peak of a June hill crumbles, on a chair waits Evans for the wind. Till the train dissolves in a plume of smoke, Evans on a chair waits for the wind. Till the dust brings tears to his eyes, on a chair Evans waits for the wind. Till the sweat on his chin dries out, Evans waits for the wind on a chair. Till the beards of the camels flutter, till the grains flit away like fleas, till a pennant's caught in a kite string, till his walking stick swings like a golf club, till the sand seethes like foam on breakers, till his suitcase lid flies open. On a chair on the hilltop, Evans points to where the wind lies asleep, in a cave in the desert.
The next poem we read is a cycle. It's called Serang. Serang. And Serang is the name of a suburb of a Belgian town just under Maastricht. The Belgian town, we say Luik, the French say Liège, it's French speaking, and the Germans say Lüttich. I don't know what the English say to Luik, how they pronounce it.
Liège, we use the French. Yeah.
They keep the name, which is good. Well, it's a quite a grim place, and in Serang are a lot of empty factories, and they use this empty factory to store the gear the street workers need to repair the streets. And I've been there with a photographer, Stefan Keppel, who made the cover of Acedia. Like he made pictures of this beton factory, and we've been there a few times, and sometimes he just could do click, and he had this marvelous image, which of course he really worked on a lot. And I had to go back 20 times more to write this series of poems. And to take in one more year to finish it. So it showed me how slow I go in my work compared to photography. We read the first, they're very short. We read the first, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th fragments of the series. So I guess one by one, Dutch, English. So, op een onbetreden hoogte, zo schijnt een balk van zonlicht de fabriek in. Grijpt je hand in het fijne stof in de reling. Een balk tussen je benen, boven de diepte, de twinkeling uit de bergscherven, springt door ijzeren vierkantjes onder je voeten. Tot op de gladde kant van het leisteen valt als een balk licht door het raam de bruine gloed in het zwarte haar.
Serang 1. At an untrodden height, such a beam of sunlight shines inside the factory. Your fingers grip the fine dust, the handrail. The beam between your legs, above the depths. The twinkling from the heap of shards springs up through iron latticework under your feet. Onto the smooth face of the slate falls as a beam of light through the window. The brown glow in your black hair.
7. Rook lijkt op te walmen, zo diep onder je, dat je ogen de schaduw terug op een plek dwingen. Het stof van de grond komt, je hand omklemt de stang naast de trap. Blauwe seringen groeien uit het grind, staalplaten krullen op in de hoeken. Stenen op een kant, met betondraad versterkt, de gaten in de metalen overloop, de kieren ertussen, je zolen boven wegwaaiend poeder.
7. Smoke seems to well up so deep beneath you that your eyes force the shadows back where they belong. The dust rises from the ground. Your hand grasps the rail beside the stairway. Blue lilacs grow out of the gravel. Steel sheets curl in the corners. Chunks of concrete on their side reinforced with wire. The holes in the metal landing, the cracks between them, your soles over powder that wafts away.
8. Zeemansknopen in een afgebroken stuk touw, dat aan de reling van de loopbrug hangt. Je been schuift door het ijzer, het rooster in. Je krimpt, zakt in elkaar en schelt op een plateau waar je je panty afrolt, het bloeden dept, met een doek het vuil wegveegt, de naar binnen gevouwen leuning, de berg glinsterende leistenen, de omgevallen afrostering, het trommelen op de golfplaten, de ingezakte rupspanden en open containers.
8. Reef knots in a torn-off piece of rope hanging from the rail of the gantry. Your leg skids through the iron into the grating. You buckle, slump, and take refuge on a landing where you roll down your tights, staunch the bleeding, wipe away the dirt with a cloth, the handrail twisted inwards, the heap of glistening slates, the fallen meshwork, the drumming on the corrugated panels, the collapsed caterpillar tracks and open dumpsters.
9. Je laat je hand vallen. Nergens durf je te leunen. Kun je je vasthouden. De koker van dunne metaalstrips rondom je. De sport die ontbreekt. De draaiende schaduwen. Wind trekt aan het dak. Laat het klapperen. Duwt de golfplaten tegen de schuine stangen. De diep ingeklonken voetstap in het poeder. Het wordt donker. Straks wordt het nacht. Maar alles blijft stil en grijs onder het stof.
9. You drop your hand. There's nothing you dare to lean on, nowhere to hold on to. The coil of thin metal strips around you, the missing rung, the wheeling shadows. Wind tugs at the roof, sets it clattering, bangs the corrugated iron against the cross stays. The footstep planted deep in the powder. It's getting dark. It will soon be night. But everything stays silent and grey under the dust.
Thanks. The next poems are very short. One of the good things of being translated, apart from that it's very, I'm happy to be translated, to travel with my poetry, and I'm very grateful to Francis and our collaboration. But also another good thing about being translated is that you can smuggle a bit. Well, I don't say smuggle, but this poem that I will read was not a poem in my original work, but I've written it. But it was a part of another poem, so I could leave out 3/4 of the poem and just say this end is one poem. So you can, with a selected poem, you can of course change your oeuvre or your work or the context. It's okay. It also lost the title with this process. Een man eet een appel in het park en de bomen buigen om hem heen. Het gras is uit de stammen gelopen, het verdringt zich rond zijn voeten. De vijver duwt planten op de oever. De man neemt een hap uit zijn appel en laat die op zijn tong kantelen. Zuigt het vocht eruit en vermaalt. De vijver krimpt achter de struiken. Takken wijzen uit de bomen omhoog. Een dier klimt tegen een stam op en springt door het veld. Voorbij het groen aan de straatkant, terug de vijver langs. De struiken door, naar een man die zijn handen vouwt op het veld in de verte in een park.
A man is eating an apple in the park, and the trees bow down around him. The grass has run out of the tree trunks. It's jostling around his feet. The pond pushes plants to the bank. The man takes a bite of the apple and lets it tip over on his tongue, sucks out the juice and crunches. The pond shrinks behind the shrubs. Branches point upwards out of the trees. An animal climbs up a trunk, and leaps and sprints across the grass, along the green beside the street, back to the pond and past the shrubs, to a man who's folding his arms on the grass in the distance in a park.
I think we're about in the time, but we have one last poem, which is okay when we read that too. It's called Man in the Water, and it's written for a special occasion. In Holland, we have this tradition that if someone dies, which happens in the larger cities without relatives or friends, you get this lonely funeral, and then they call a poet. In fact, that's a group of poets who change to do this, to write a poem especially for this person who died alone. And I've did it a few times, and usually went to the house where the one lived, and it was sort of a detective, empty house, dead person poem, always the same. And I thought, well, should I continue this? Because you also don't know if the one dying alone was a poetry hater, and then you come read a poem to his grave and put it on his coffin. So I felt a bit difficult sometimes about this. But the last time before I said that, and I'm not asked about it anymore, to do this anymore. The last time I got well, it's usually the police who informs the poets a sort of little information. This was a poem for a man from Ukraine who was in Amsterdam, and he died on a strange way. He died on the pound in front of the blue tea house in the Vondelpark in the center of Amsterdam. But I think this is only 50 centimeters deep. So you must be very, very drunk or I don't know what to be able to drown in such a small pound. And this enabled me to do something different. So to write a poem more about the imagination. I saw at the side of the lake there was a statue of a woman without arms, and then the man in the pond and the statue of the woman next to it. Then I got it gave me the story of the poem, the narrative. It's Man in het water. Op de oever staat een ontarmde vrouw voor de satellietschotel van het theehuis. Je stelt je voor hoe ze haar armen ophief en ze met een worp de lucht invlogen. De vrouw kijkt naar je met open mond. In het water reik je naar je beide armen. Je trouwring verloor je in de rozentuin. Je polshorloge loopt altijd een uur voor. Op de in het water gevallen boompartij zie je vogelnesten en zwarte torretjes. Een eend zwemt langzaam naar je toe, draait zijn snavel en je ziet zijn oog, waarin de vijver rond is en blauw. Je benen drijven over de zachte bodem tussen drabbige, vlokkende modder. Het water is koud en je jas dijt uit en golft op de rimpels van je val. De eend kwaakt en zwenkt van je weg. De boomtakken wiegen op de spiegel. Het wordt ochtend, het licht trekt op als de vrouw zich naar het water buigt, met haar open mond de vijver opdringt. Je ligt in een kuil, je handen in de grond, tilt je borst op en komt traag overeind. Slurpend trek je je handen uit de modder en plaats ze boven haar beide oksels, de plek waar ooit haar armen waren. Haar haar is kort, haar borsten klein, het steen voelt warm, haar nek is gaaf. En je voelt haar kracht je op te tillen, haar wil je uit de aarde te trekken en je hoog de lucht in te werpen, naar de wolken, de planeten, de zon, de melkweg en het sterrenstof, dwars door de klinkers van je naam, de omwegen die je maakte te niet doen. Voor de zomer dat je op aarde kwam, er een wind op stak die niet aanhield en de bloesem tussen het koren landde.
Man in the water. An armless woman is standing by the lake, outside the spaceship disk of a tea house. You imagine how she lifted up her arms and tossed them flying into the sky. The woman looks at you open-mouthed. You stretch toward your two arms through the water. You lost your wedding ring in the rose garden. Your wristwatch always runs an hour fast. On the fallen clump of trees across the water, you see birds' nests and black beetles. A duck swims slowly toward you, turns its beak, and you see its eye in which the lake is round and blue. Your legs float across the pond's soft shallows, over ooze and wisps of mud. The water is cold. Your coat swells out and undulates along the ripples of your fall. The duck quacks and veers away from you. Tree branches rock along the waterline. Day is breaking, the light is rising, when the woman stoops to the water, drinks the lake dry with her open mouth. You're lying in a hollow, your hands in the mud. You lift your chest and slowly stretch. You pull your hands from the sludge with a plop and place them just above her armpits, where her arms used to be. Her hair is short, her breasts are small, the stone feels warm, her neck unblemished. And you feel her power to lift you up, her will to pull you out of the earth and throw you high into the sky, towards the clouds, the sun, the planets, the Milky Way, the dust of stars, right through the vowels of your name, erasing the roundabout ways you took before the summer you arrived on earth, and a wind blew up that didn't last long, and the blossom landed between the wheat.
Thank you.
That was lovely. We've never had a reading quite like that, where you have the sort of the chiming effect of two different languages matching up. And the story about Man on the Water was very moving. I wasn't aware of it. So I'd like to bring David O'Meara in, who has agreed to lead you both through a discussion about the poems and the process of translating them. David lives in Ottawa. He is the author of 5 collections of poetry and a play called Disaster. He has been shortlisted for the Gerald Lampert Award, the Relet Prize, the Trillium Book Award, a National Magazine Award. He has won the Archibald Lampman Award twice, and his most recent collection of poetry is called Masses on Radar. David?
Thanks, Carmen. And I just want to say how happy I am to be part of this event today. Yeah, I'm just going to take about 15 minutes, ask a few questions with both Erik and Francis. I'm going to start with Erik. I love that, and this is something that I love about readings, is you discover some things about the poems. I love that you sort of snuck in, or you say smuggled in, the A Man is Eating an Apple poem. And it kind of prompts me to, I guess, ask, you've had 6 previous books of poems, and now you've come to put to select together. Were there certain considerations you were concerned with about collecting these poems, and what was the narrative that you were trying to create with choosing from each individual volume into a selected?
Okay. Well, I think it's very much in the process of the collaboration with Francis, because I've in fact asked Francis in 2013, so 9 years ago, when I wrote the Witness on the Threshold we started with. We could make a little book at the Jan van Eyck Academy, where I'm an advisor, and we have international art students there, or we have to say participants. It's postdoc, and we wanted to make a book in Dutch and English, and Francis happily said yes, although he was still translating the entire work of I think Serbian poet. So. And then we decided, okay, we'll do some more, but then the poems that I usually do on when I do readings. So then I have them. And then I kept on sending them some more in case there would be a book eventually. And in fact, I think you chose a lot what you wanted to translate from that file, I think, Francis. So the new composition, which you get in another language, so you lose the composition of the original book, was I think the choice from what could work in English for Francis mainly. And of course I have sometimes when we were in not Serran, but when I was in Münster, they also needed an English translation, and of course, happily they asked Francis for that. So it took me quite a while to get English translations. I've been translated in French, German, and Italian way before, and I've sort of waited until Francis had time because I really wanted to work with him. So that's a bit how.
Thanks.
Well, and I'll bring Francis in here. You mentioned in your translator's note that your process of translating and creating an English text, that both the surface and underlying layers of the text. And I wonder if we could talk about that. You worked in collaboration with Erik on some of these things, but also independently, right?
Yeah, very much. That I think, as Erik said, that he'd send me poems, and generally, yes, I'd translate those, but with a bigger set, I'd be choosing some. Then, well, I'd make a first draft. My wife's a Dutch native speaker, so she'd check if there's anything obvious that I've missed or got the wrong nuance or whatever. And then I'd sort of polish them up until I felt that, well, at least they were rough and ready poems. But then I'd run them past Erik, who obviously reads English really, really well. And so, well, is there anything I'd be asking, is there anything I've missed here, or have I got the wrong end of the stick at one point? And and he'd be writing back and saying, yeah, that's fine, but I actually meant more this in this line, and and so say sometimes that there might be certain translations in a line where we'd be sort of slightly negotiating it a bit, where I'd be trying to choose, say, between two alternatives, and he might say, oh, well, this is better. And then I'd be taking that away, reworking it, and then, running the final version, or the semi-final version, past Erik. And of course, I'm sure, as a poet yourself, there's a lot of little bits of polishing and tweaking right until it goes to press.
Mm-hmm.
I'll follow up on that, and just, I think tone and atmosphere in Erik's work is such a strong, powerful force of the effect of the poems. Did you find it a challenge to recreate that in English, or did it arise sort of naturally out of the text?
I felt, it did arise out of the text, but I think, as a translator, what I'm trying to do is sort of almost be a ventriloquist in another language. So trying to sort of capture that voice, and, obviously, that means certain word choices that, say, trying to capture, say, the fact that there's a certain, say, a degree of assonance, or there might be a bit of onomatopoeia in there, but being careful not to over egg the pudding and put in too much, which wouldn't be loyal, if you like. So
I'll go back to Erik, and just I'm as I said in the introduction, there's a strong attraction to images in your poems. I think Francis calls it filmic in his notes, and the kind of witnessed image. And are there any thoughts on, or a perspective on, why you lean that way? Is it directly a influence from landscape, or even film for that matter, where your voice comes from, your perspective?
Well, I think it got more over the years than in my early work. And in a way, you can see it in the selected poems, because the German starts with the German book starts with the latest work and then goes back to my youth. And for this book, Carmine, the editor, really wonderfully edited, I think. He said, well, just turn it around. Start with the young poet and get used to the voice, and then you end with the more filmic, maybe a bit more quiet poems. What we read now is very much from the time when I got to know Francis. So I wrote it also a bit about the time. So 2013, 14, 15. Well, I don't. I have a good friend, Jan Baak, who's a poet too, and he once said to me, "We should stop with these images." But it felt a bit like, no, it's like, does someone wants to poke out my eyes or so? It's I can. And we were called in the Morgen the cinematic poets of that time. It was some time ago, and I think it's still there's a narrative under the images in every poem, and of course it's up to the reader to see that or not see that or make his own narrative. But I like to tell things with images, and I think there's already so much emotion in how you put the words down that they're not there for nothing. They're not just photos. So that's maybe answers your question.
Yeah, we got a few more minutes. I just want to add, following up on that. I know we've had discussions. I have a limited knowledge of Dutch, the history of Dutch poetry, but I do mention in my intro that you sort of exist a little bit outside of the poetic trends. What I understand, in very broad strokes, is there's a very strong romantic trend, and then there's a very experimental trend on the other end. And where would you place yourself? I feel like maybe your voice, what you're trying to do, this sort of cinema thing, was trying to find a way of articulating your own perspective, but in a different way than maybe what other voices in Dutch poetry were doing.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult question because to place oneself is difficult, I think. But I think the poets I read, so I don't talk about myself. They become islands, so they become totally to stand on themselves, and they sort of lose at the end of their writing time. They lose the acquaintances. They lose the reference to the others, and that's usually when I start to really like it, when they become islands. I think in my generation, there was in the end of the 90s when we debuted, there was some sort of, well, a lot of poets from my age, Menno Wichmann, Julia Pfeiffer, they were more romantic, either sort of there was a sort of new Van de Scheckle, and the generation before I felt closer to maybe. But Belgian poets from my age, like Paul Bogaert, who's born on the same night as me, and well, in a way also Bart Meuleman. In my pure age generation, I feel in the far Jan Lauwerijn's sort of connection to their work more than the Dutch. And the other thing is that becoming isolated is also going for, well, I lived in Berlin a year, and in that year I sort of drifted away a bit from the Dutch poetry scene, and my influences became more international. Like I'm influenced by German, Canadian, Italian poets. So I feel sort of part of, well, for example, Ken Babstock is also important for my work, who I've been reading with in Rotterdam in 2002. So these become also sort of time travelers. And for that, of course, these translations are also so important. That's so yeah. The isolation I can feel in Holland, I don't feel in the world.
That's great. I think Carmen's got a few questions.
Yeah, no, I was just
reviewing, right?
I'm sorry about interrupting because the discussion is so interesting, and I wish we could have more of these kinds of conversations. Frankly, one of the things that attracted me to them, I mean, I knew Erik a little bit because I think you introduced me to him, David, many years ago. He was on a tour through Canada, and I remember attending the reading and I remember hearing the poems, but seeing them on the page, seeing them in translation was so interesting because they didn't sound like anything else. They very spare, very clear, very simple, which on the face of it are words that we do apply to English poetry, except that all that spareness and clarity and simplicity came together in a very unusual way, very strange way, but never in a way that felt confusing. I mean, you were always very grounded in the poems, except that that filmic quality made you feel as though you were sort of set apart from it. It was very weird and very, very compelling. And what I loved about the translation is that it preserved that strangeness, that otherness. And so I was very interested in reading the note that Francis provided, because of course a lot of it is afterward is about the struggles he takes in creating this English counterpart for the poets that he translates, and making sure that they, that the losses sort of don't offset the gains. And but that made me wonder, if, I mean, I guess this is a question for Francis, but if as a part of your goal is, if a part of your goal is also to sort of extend the purview of English poetry, so that the task of translating a poet into English and creating a space for them where one didn't exist is basically a kind of expanding what English poetry can do, bringing in a new vision, a new perspective. I mean, I was interested to hear sort of Erik talk about Ken Babstock's work and taking in some of that quality into his work. And I'm wondering, Francis, if as a part of this project of yours, and it sounds like it's a project because this is not a side hustle. This is your life's work, bringing these Serbian, Bosnian, Hungarian, Russian poets into English. And every time you do that, I have to think that the language itself and what's possible becomes slightly bigger, because you're bringing in all these effects, or generating all these effects. And so I'm wondering if that is ever on your mind as you're choosing a poet to translate, working on the poems that you feel as though you're helping sort of extend what's possible in English.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely way of putting it. That by Englishing, if you like, great poets who don't write in English, that you are expanding the possibilities. Maybe those possibilities are more perhaps for original Anglophone poets to pick up and run with. I think when you actually translate, it's much simpler. It's just, hey, this is a really good poet, that Anglophone readers should know about this person, so you know about this poetry. This is great. I want to share the experience. And of course, sharing the experience with Anglophone readers aren't just native English readers, of course, that English is an international language, that it's reaching out to new audiences, and just, maybe sharing my enthusiasm, more simple as that.
Yeah. No, I definitely, as a fellow poet reading Erik's work, I did have moments where I thought, wow, it'd be interesting to try something like that, to not sort of overcomplicate or overwork a line, to just let it ring through, let it ring on its own, or an image or a detail. Again, like there are aspects of Erik's work that are not unfamiliar to the English tradition, except the confidence, I think, to which you will, and it's one that grows through the book, the confidence with which you will assemble a bunch some details, let them hang sort of on the page, let them sort of grow and accrue. Is that confidence, that tone, I think feels very fresh and energizing. But it makes me wonder also, Francis, if there have ever been poets that you realized you couldn't bring through, too hard, too difficult, too much would be lost. Have you ever had those moments?
There are not poets. There's one poem which defeated me totally.
One of Erik's?
No.
No.
It was by Ivan Vilalic, the Serbian poet whose complete works I was doing. But generally, there's always a way round, but inevitably you lose something, and what you're trying to do is, well, put something back that's in the spirit of the poem, even if it's not exactly the same. And sure, you might lose a lovely word play in one poem, and you might be able to work in a word play in another poem. and that sort of thing. But yeah,
No, that's good. That's a good question. Well, next question. Sorry, I'm full of questions. I find this like I'm just so excited by this event. But it's a question for Erik, and I'm just wondering, and I have a selfish reason for asking this, because some of my poems were translated into French recently, and I was shocked by how complicated some of the early ones were, and I thought, oh, these are really complicated poems. Did they need to be that complicated? And so I'm wondering if in seeing, and plus because I also read French, I was able to see the solutions that the translator came up with in order to deal with these problems. Some of them were problems that were natural to writing in English, but some of them were problems that had to do with the specific ways I did something, and that you had to find a way to solve it or ignore it completely and find a workaround. But I did discover things about my own work, things that sort of surprised me and things that kind of shamed me. But I'm wondering if there was ever an experience like that for you when reading the translation. Was there anything that you were happy to discover in the translation? And was there anything that you felt, and ultimately, was there anything that you felt that not unpleasantly surprised you, but you had no idea your poems even sounded like that?
Yes, well, that is a few things I want to say about that. Maybe it's not a straight answer, but more circling around it. I've been working on, freelancer on the Dutch Institute in Paris when it still existed. So I was in between French and French translators, Dutch poets, and I learned that a lot thought that their own, I call it camping France, the French, the Dutch spoke from the camping municipal, by camping somewhere. They were controlling their translators, and I said, well, usually the translators know a bit more than this. So once you have the feeling your translator understands you, give them all the liberties. Give them really all the liberties they want. And that's what I like so much about Francis, because the title of the book in Dutch is Hekel aan Woorden, Hatred of Words. Well, okay, Hatred of Words. But then Francis came up with Words Are the Worst.
It's a great title. Yeah.
And I like it if these liberties start, because then it can become poetry in the other language.
Yeah.
I had sometimes with a French translator that I saw some mistakes also in my early work, like there was thrust under the ground, and I meant thrust in the ground, something like that, like this. But what I learned from it, there's something. Well, maybe this is a bit sentimental, but my grandmother was Welsh, and I lived with her in a house when I was a boy, and I don't speak Welsh; we spoke English. So why not write my own poems in English? Well, I tried when I was a teenager, and it was totally rubbish. It was things, then my girlfriend left me, things like that. It was pop songs, cliches. None of it was good. And as a boy of 14, I knew it. I was writing rubbish. And then I wrote this line down. De wereld is zojuist de trap afgelopen en sloeg zonder woorden de deur dicht. And there was something absurd about it. So there was something which intrigued me, which told me something I didn't know. So I needed this Dutch language to write my poems. So I wanted to say this on this moment that I finally have an English book, or finally.
Well, I'm glad. I am glad we were able to come through for you. I think we have a couple of questions, maybe more that we can bring up. Nice to hear the poems about language. The volume is not bilingual. Unfortunately, that would have made it too big a book, maybe too unwieldy. Question for Erik: did reading your poems in translation reveal anything surprising about any of the poems to you? Okay, so you answered that as well, or already. But anything you want to add to what you said before about maybe something about the process of seeing these translations as they were coming in? Did you ever go back? Did you ever learn something in the translation and want to fix the original?
Yeah, I was thinking. No, well, talking about this liberty. I think when you are translated in another language, you become a bit another poet.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
I think we should accept that. So it's a bit the other me in the other language. It's never the same. If it's good, it's never the same. And also, another translator said it to me, yeah, if you translate your work in English just word for word, there's really nothing there. Someone has to get this tone. And I think, I know it from Roger Stiel, who was a good German translator I was happy to work with. And I really think in German I'm a much older man than in Dutch.
Well, I'm curious, so you've been translated into German, into Italian as well. So what kind of Italian are you? I'm curious.
My Italian, I don't know. No,
Okay.
Frankie is a good translator, but I don't know.
Okay.
No, of course, English. In Holland, everyone speaks English all day, so you're more part of it, and it's Well, it is my work, but it's also Francis' work. It is different.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, we have more questions. From Cora, how were the interactions between poet and translator in completing the book? Did some poems require a lot of discussion or debate?
Francis?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to pick up on what Erik said, that he's saying that it's important to give translators some creative freedom. And I think Erik is actually the ideal source poet who's able to who will answer my questions, and a lot of it was I'd be sending these drafts and asking questions, and tell me if I was missing it, but without if I was missing anything or it was off track, but without actually wanting to do the English for me, if you see what I mean. So was also letting me get on with making it into an English poem that worked, but just making sure that it was sort of conveying the poetic idea and things like that. So yeah, I think there certainly was a lot of discussion, but not an excessive amount, if you see what I mean. And certainly when it comes to the polishing stage, well, that was very much up to me.
Yeah, I remember one peculiar thing that on the total end, Hanneke, your wife, made some corrections, and she said, "Well, this means that," and she was totally right. But I thought, no, I will give Francis liberty to change it. So corrected in a way what normally the poet would do. But when I say, okay, make it something else, that was. But it's good. She controlled it in the end. That was good.
Yeah.
Another question. Patrick Coleman, question for Francis. How much of the phonetic quality of Dutch poetry can be conveyed in English without over-egging the pudding? I used to think Dutch and English were not that far apart, but no. You address this in your afterword, I have to say.
I think what Dutch and English are certainly very close, which can sometimes help. So groeien and roeien become grow and row, for example. And now and again you get something there that helps, but actually phonically they're actually quite different. So that Dutch has quite a lot of g sounds that in English have become g. Vowels are quite different. So I'd say very much like any other language that you're. I mean, what I do first is I get the meaning across in a sort of exploded literal with all sorts of alternatives over the page, and then I try to build that into an English poetic line. And maybe I'm looking at what's going on in the Dutch, and is there alliteration here? Or am I putting in lots of alliteration where there shouldn't be? But I'm maybe trying to build it up in an English way, but with one eye on the Dutch. again, now and again, something transfers straight across. I don't know if that answers the question. But...
Shall I add a little thing? Because the question David asked, I think you can connect to it about the images or the role of the images. Because when the translations from Lalić and of a great Suriname Dutch poet, Hans Faveri, Against Forgetting, it's a book I recommend everybody. It's with New Directions in French translation. The images translated by Francis, I think, somehow carry the poem also. But I mean, what is translating an image? Because in other words, we see other things, and of course we know the reader makes the image finally. But I think there's something in the translations of Francis that the focus on the images are working. I hope, or I think.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, because I mean, for me, literal translation is going to kill a poem. So I think, to me, what you're doing is you're looking at, well, what is the image? What's the poet saying in this line or in this phrase? And getting that, say in Erik's poem, the sort of visual filmic quality, I think it's really important.
Excellent. I think this is the last question from Medri Kurdim. Many thanks for the beautiful reading. I'm very grateful for the poetry and the conversation. Erik, could you please say more about what it was like to write a funerary poem for someone you didn't know or don't know? What is the strangest and what is the least strange about that experience? I mean, the strangest is that you're doing it, I would say. that it is an assignment.
Yeah,
Least strange? I don't know.
Well, it's all weird because it's a bit like, what do I have to do with it? Where do I come in this person? They're dying and having a sort of life you have to imagine because you have little facts or.
Well, can I just ask very quickly? And you may have already brought this up when you introduced the poem, but maybe I missed it. But like, how does it work? Or you mentioned the police. Do they reach out to you? Does some government member reach out to you and asks you to do this? Are you actually commissioned? Is there payment that's exchanged?
Yeah, there's a small payment. It were poets who invented it. So I have to say Bart Droog in Groningen started it when he was city poet, and then later Frank Stuyven took it over, and there's 2 books of it. They're also translated in English with examples of this lonely funeral poet. I don't know which publisher, but I think David Goldmar translated that. And Starek sort of became, he looked a bit like a raven. He sort of became we had the pool des doods, the pool of poets, the club of poets of the dead. So it was, and you are called by Starek, by the guy, and now it's someone else, and he said, well, this and that person died. You have this and this fact. You can call for more information that number, and then you get 2 days to write your poem. And usually I have to say, it can also fail, but okay, you want to make something. So you write the poem, you go to the lonely funeral, and usually there are 4 carriers for the grave. If they were very rich, there were 8 men carrying the coffin, and you read it in the church in between 3 songs, like between the second and the third, and then the cage goes to the graveyard. Then you also walk there, and usually you lay your poem on the coffin, and then it goes down. But there's no one else. So and when people heard about it, they want to film it. The TV wanted to be there. But Starek really had to block that. Like, no, it should be a lonely funeral. It's only for the person who died. And some people said there was some sort of social thing about it. But okay, you don't help people. They're already dead.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, I think we have one last question.
Christian.
Yeah. So, okay. Wittgenstein wrote, "People nowadays think scientists are there to instruct them, poets, musicians, etc., to entertain them." This is 2 parts. Yeah, that's the latter. That the latter have something to teach them, but never occurs to them. Culture and Value, 2002. What are your thoughts on this observation? Are you an entertainer, Erik, or are you an instructor?
Can you repeat the?
Sure.
Yeah. People nowadays think scientists are there to instruct them, poets, musicians are to entertain them. Yes. Yeah, I see. That the latter have something to teach them. That never occurred to them. Yeah. Well, in my lovely home country, poetry is and it's more and more Kleinkunst. Kleinkunst is small art, and we're very much seen as entertainers. It's true. And sometimes when we do readings, and I did some readings together with David, and I really like that because, well, we were skipped, like he said, one word Dutch, one word English. When you are performing, you're performing, and in the introductions. But I think there's a difference between the introduction and the poem itself, which can be serious. So if it's good, it's both of that. And I think it's very good that it's brought up because it's still a very serious case. Very good poetry is a serious case. So I agree that.
I think that's it. I think that's all we have. I want to thank Francis, Erik, and David for joining us. This was totally satisfying, from the readings to the discussion. Thank you so much. And we have a winner for the poetry book, and the winner is Patrick Coleman.
Okay.
So Patrick, just email marketing@vehiculepress.com to claim your prize. If anyone else would like a copy of the book, and we all hope you would, you can email us directly at Véhicule Press, and we'll happily send you one, or you can buy it or order it wherever you buy your books. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon, and Francis and Erik, have a great rest of your night. Thank you so much. Ciao.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Guys, stay on for a second.